My name is Marion Doyle, and I am 63 years old. I have lived in this corner house for more than 3 decades, ever since my husband was still alive and my son was just a boy in grade school. I once believed my later years would be quiet, a rose garden in the back, the hum of the radio in the morning, and afternoons waiting for my grandchildren to tumble through the door. I never imagined the very house I helped pay for would turn into a battleground between me and my own family. I came home from the grocery store with 2 bags of vegetables in my arms, already planning what I would cook for dinner. My hand knew the motion by heart, slipping the key into the lock, a gentle turn, the soft click of home. But that afternoon, the metal resisted. The key would not turn. Once, twice, 3 times, harder each time. My key was useless now, no more than a shard of metal. I stepped back, staring at the white, painted door I had cleaned so many times. Something was wrong. My heart quickened, not from the heat of the sun, but from a dread that spread through me. I knocked gently. "Adam, it's Mom. I'm back." Silence. Only the wind in the oak trees. Then I saw it, a slip of paper taped just below the peephole. The words were printed in bold strokes, sharp and merciless. "Don't come back. Your son needs his privacy." The letters blurred as my eyes filled, every line cut like glass. Adam, my son. The boy I'd raised alone after his father passed. Wanted me gone from my own house. I reached out, touching the note, half hoping it would crumble and disappear, half praying this was a cruel dream. But the paper was solid. Real. I knocked again, harder this time. "Damn, are you there? Talk to me." Nothing, only silence. And then, like a second knife, I recognized the handwriting. It wasn't Adam's. The strokes were too neat, slanted in that clipped way I had seen before. It was Brianna's, my daughter-in-law's. Not my son, but my daughter-in-law had left this message. A numbness spread through me. I backed down the porch steps, the grocery bags slipping from my hands, tomatoes rolling across the bricks. I stood there in the blazing sun. Beneath the porch of the house I had poured my savings, and my sweat into, the house where every brick and every door frame carried a piece of me, and I was being told I no longer belonged. I did not cry. My tears had been spent years ago, after my husband's funeral. Instead, I clenched the paper in my hand, the wind lifting the hem of my dress. And in that stillness, I knew one thing: they could change the locks, but they could not erase the truth. My name, my sacrifice, my claim, those were built into the very bones of the house. I stood on that porch, hollow and shaking, and I understood the battle was only beginning. I remember the day we signed the co-ownership papers, as if it had been a birthday party instead of a legal appointment. Adam had just married Brianna, and she stood there in a cream-colored dress that smelled of lilac perfume, her hand gripping his as if she'd already claimed him completely. I was so foolish then, smiling at the notary, sliding the pen across thick legal sheets without pausing to read each line. "It's just a formality," Adam had said. I wanted him happy. I wanted him to feel secure. And so I signed, thinking love was stronger than signatures, that family was sturdier than ink. Now, standing in the driveway, that memory felt like a betrayal I had written myself into. Later that evening, when I finally confronted them, Brianna was the one who spoke, her voice sharp and unwavering. Adam sat at the dining table, his eyes downcast, avoiding mine. "We've had the locks changed," she announced. She held up a ring of silver keys, and the sound of them jingling might as well have been a chain locking me out. "For safety. For privacy. It's best this way." I held out my hand, expecting at least one. A spare key, the way families always keep a door cracked open for each other. "Give me mine," I said quietly. But Brianna's mouth curved into that polite smile that never reached her eyes. "No, Marion. This is our home now. We need boundaries. We'll manage just fine without extras floating around." She tucked the keys into her purse with a finality that left me speechless. Adam said nothing. Not one word in defense of his mother. He pressed his lips together, as though silence would save him from choosing sides. That night I wandered the neighborhood like a ghost, carrying the echo of jingling keys in my chest. I stopped at the corner where Mr. and Mrs. Keating were trimming their hedges. They had lived there longer than we had, and they had seen everything: the years of repainting, the mortgage envelopes I had mailed religiously, the nights I stayed up waiting for Adam to come home from high school football practice. Mrs. Keating lowered her voice, glancing toward my house as though afraid Brianna might hear even from across the street. "You do know, don't you?" she whispered. Know what? My voice cracked like old wood. That your name is still on the deed. You're not just a guest there, Marion. That house is as much yours as it is theirs. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I clutched the grocery bag tighter, though it was nearly empty now, the tomatoes long gone from their stems. For months, I had let myself believe I was powerless, that I had been erased from the home I helped build. But suddenly, a door opened in my mind that was far sturdier than the one Brianna had locked. On the walk back, the streetlights flickering on one by one, I thought about ink on paper, about how foolishly I had once trusted it, and how maybe, just maybe, it could be my weapon now. I began to wonder if the very papers I had signed in naivety could be the same ones I would wield in defense. Maybe trust had built the walls, but documents, the cold, black letters of the law, would decide who truly belonged within them. The envelope was slipped beneath the door like a hotel bill, folded crisp and flat as though formality could disguise cruelty. When I bent down and opened it, the words screamed louder than any confrontation could. You no longer have the right to reside at this address. My own home, reduced to a line of cold type on cheap paper. I read it twice, 3 times, waiting for my eyes to trick me, for the letters to rearrange themselves into something less final. But the message never softened. It was eviction, not from a landlord or a bank, but from my own family. When I tried to open the garage that afternoon, the keypad rejected every code I had memorized over the years. I pressed my birthday, the last 4 digits of Adam's old phone number, even the sequence Brianna had once chosen, her wedding date. Every attempt blinked back at me with a red light of denial. Later, when I sat down at the library computer to check the joint bank account, my password no longer worked. The screen informed me my access had been updated. Updated. A gentle word that meant erased. I was a ghost haunting a place I was still alive in. That night, I sat at the kitchen table of a friend who let me stay the night, staring at the letter until the words blurred into black ink stains. I could hear Brianna's voice in my head, polite, steady. The kind of tone people use when they want to pretend they are acting in everyone's best interest. It's for privacy. It's better this way, but something in me, some old, stubborn root, refused to believe that was the end. The next morning, I walked into the office of a community legal aid attorney. The room smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet, hardly a place of power. The man across the desk looked barely 30. Tie askew, sleeves rolled. He listened while I unfolded my story, the eviction letter trembling in my hand like a white flag. When I finished, he leaned back, tapping the page with his pen. They can't do this. I blinked. What do you mean? His voice was steady, matter of fact, like someone explaining the weather. If your name is still on the deed, they can't evict you. You're not a tenant. You're an owner. The words settled in my chest like a stone dropped into water, heavy but creating ripples. I had been moving through the last few days like a victim, stripped, silenced, pushed aside. But here was the truth, simple and undeniable. I still had a card left to play. Walking out of that office, the sun seemed sharper, the street louder. My legs shook as if they belonged to someone who had been asleep too long and was only now waking. They had changed the locks, the passwords, even the rules of entry into my life. But none of that changed the ink still binding my name to the house. For the first time since the locks clicked shut behind me, I no longer felt erased. From victim, I realized I might just become the challenger. The game wasn't over. Not yet. When I finally gathered the courage to go back and retrieve some of my things, I rehearsed what I would say. I told myself I would be calm, polite, that I would not let Brianna's clipped voice or Adam's silence unravel me. I would just take what was mine, my clothes, my books, a few framed pictures, and leave before the weight of memory pressed too hard. But when I opened the door to the room I had called mine, I was met with emptiness. The dresser stood bare, its drawers open like hollow mouths. The closet was stripped clean, hangers clattering against one another as if mocking me. The quilt I had stitched with my mother decades ago was gone. The chair where I used to sit and sew was gone. The faint smell of lavender detergent I had always carried into that space was gone too, replaced by a sterile, perfumed air that didn't belong. My knees weakened. I leaned against the doorframe, letting my eyes sweep across the space where my life had been erased. I moved to the corner, half hoping something might have been overlooked. That was when the loss hit me hardest. The wall where our wedding photo had hung was blank, nails removed, paint patched to cover any sign it had ever been there. The small altar I had built for my late husband, with his rosary, the photo of him fishing at the lake, the candle stub that always carried the smell of beeswax. It was gone, as if our history had never existed. I felt the air leave me, a hollow rush that left my chest aching. To be locked out was one cruelty. To be scrubbed away was another entirely. I searched through the closet shelves one last time, running my hand along the backboard. My fingertips hit something solid. A box shoved to the far corner, brown and worn, the cardboard edges soft from years of handling. I pulled it out and set it on the stripped bed frame. Inside were mortgage documents, brittle with age, rubber, banded together. Payment stubs, bank receipts, letters with my husband's handwriting across the margins. It was not the sentimental treasure I had come for, not the quilt, not the photos. But it was something more dangerous. It was proof. For a long moment I just sat there, the box on my lap, listening to the silence of the empty room. I could almost hear my husband's voice, low and steady, reminding me of the way he always insisted on keeping every scrap of paper. You never know when you'll need it, he had said more than once, tucking receipts into envelopes while I rolled my eyes. Now I understood. Perhaps he had known that a day like this might come, when memory and sentiment would not be enough. When the fight for our place in this house would come down to records, signatures, the dry language of debt and ownership. Sitting in that hollowed-out room, stripped of every trace of who I had been, I held the box tight. Maybe my husband had left me a weapon disguised as paperwork. Maybe, in his careful, stubborn way, he had left me a path forward. The papers smelled faintly of dust and old ink, the way time itself lingers on documents people rarely touch. I sat at the kitchen table of the friend who had taken me in. The mortgage folder spread before me like a puzzle I had ignored for years. My husband had always handled these things, his steady hand guiding us through bank visits and signatures, while I trusted that love and responsibility were enough. After he died, I kept the file tucked away, telling myself I could face it later. But later had arrived in the form of locked doors and eviction letters. The first pages were boilerplate, dense paragraphs of legal language meant to exhaust the reader into surrender. My eyes skimmed, snagged, backtracked. For every line about escrow and interest, I wondered how many nights my husband had sat hunched under the lamp, making sure none of this was missed. He had carried the weight of responsibility so I wouldn't have to. And now, with him gone, the weight was mine alone. Half an hour passed before I saw it my own name. It wasn't at the bottom, the way Brianna always insisted. You just co-signed Marion, it's Adam's loan now. No, there it was, in black ink. Centered neatly at the top line of ownership, Marion Doyle. My signature, bold but slightly trembling, sat above Adam's, not beneath it. My breath caught in my throat. For years, I had walked through that house as though I were a guest in someone else's kingdom. But on paper, in the eyes of the law, I was queen before they were even subjects. I pressed my hand against the page, as though the ink might smudge and prove me wrong. But it didn't. My name was fixed there, undeniable. Deeper into the folder, tucked in a plastic sleeve, I found another document. I pulled it free, my fingers trembling. Power of attorney. My husband had signed it years before, giving me authority to act on his behalf should anything happen to him. I remembered the day, now blurred with grief and denial. He had pushed the paper across the table, his face serious. You'll need this someday, he'd said. I had laughed it off, accusing him of dramatics. But he'd insisted, and I'd signed. And now, here it was. The proof that I still carried the weight of his trust, his foresight, his stubborn belief in paperwork when love might falter. I leaned back, tears burning the corners of my eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from the raw, unfamiliar taste of power. They thought they had shoved me out, that a lock and a letter could erase me. But the house, the loan, the law, all of it still tied to me. For so long I had felt weak, an intruder in my own life. But the documents whispered a different truth, that I was still standing, not as a victim, but as an owner. They believed they had pushed me to the margins, but the papers said otherwise. My husband had left me more than memories, he had left me the tools to fight. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift in my favor. The bank lobby smelled of polished marble and disinfectant, the kind of sterile scent meant to convince you that everything inside was orderly, controlled. I clutched the mortgage folder to my chest like it was both shield and weapon. For years I had walked past these glass doors without stepping in, trusting Adam, and later, Brianna to handle the finances. Today, though, I walked in alone. The teller directed me to a desk at the back, where a young woman in a navy blazer smiled with the kind of politeness that assumed I was there for something routine. My voice faltered at first. "I need to check on the mortgage for 42 Willow Lane," I said, sliding the folder across. She asked for identification, and I handed over my driver's license, my hand trembling just slightly. She typed my name into her computer, her manicured nails clicking against the keys. I waited for her to frown, to tell me there was a mistake, that my son and his wife were the only ones with authority. Instead, her expression softened into something resembling respect. "Yes, Mrs. Doyle?" she said, turning the screen slightly so I could see. "Your name is on the account. You have full access." For a moment, the room tilted. I pressed my palms flat against my knees to steady myself. Full access. Two small words that cracked open weeks of silence and humiliation. I asked her to pull up the payment history. She hesitated, as though debating whether to expose family matters to me, but the law left her no choice. With a few strokes, the ledger appeared, months lined up neatly with dollar amounts posted beside them. January paid. February paid. March nothing. April nothing. The screen confirmed what the house had already whispered in its emptiness. Brianna had not been paying. Not only had they locked me out, they had been neglecting the very roof over their heads. "Are these current?" I asked, my voice sharper now. She nodded. "They're 60 days delinquent. If another month is missed, foreclosure proceedings could begin." Foreclosure. The word hit like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples through every memory I had of late. Night budgeting, of clipping coupons with my husband so we could make that month's payment, of celebrating the day the mortgage balance finally shrank into something manageable. I felt fury rise in me, not hot and wild but cold, steady, the kind of anger that shapes itself into resolve. Brianna thought she could shut me out with new locks and smug smiles. She thought I was powerless. But now the truth was right here, printed on a bank screen. Their negligence could cost us everything. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. My hand steady now. When I stood, my knees no longer wavered. The door of the law had swung open, not by kindness but by proof. All that was left was for me to step through it. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. At the bank, the pen felt heavier than it should have when I signed the form. It was a simple request: direct all delinquency notices to my address, not Adam's, not Brianna's. A single sheet of paper, a signature, a date. But the act itself carried a weight I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time, I was not reacting to what had been done to me. I was deciding what would happen next. The clerk slid the carbon copy across the counter. "You'll start receiving all correspondence," she said. "Legally, you're entitled." That word, entitled, settled deep in my bones. For so long, I had been made to feel like an intruder in my own home, a guest who overstayed her welcome. Now, at least on paper, I was not begging permission. I was reclaiming what was mine. It didn't take long for the consequences to arrive. 2 nights later, my phone lit up past midnight. I saw Brianna's name and considered ignoring it, but something inside urged me to answer. Her voice burst through the line before I could even say hello. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Marion?" Her tone was sharp enough to cut. "The bank called Adam today. They said notices are being rerouted. Do you want to humiliate us? Is that your plan?" I listened, silent, letting the venom pour out. "You're destroying this family. Adam's already under so much pressure, and now you're interfering, making everything worse. Do you hate us that much? Do you hate me?" Each accusation landed like a slap, but I stayed steady. Instead of arguing, I pressed the small red button on the side of the phone, record. Her words flowed faster, more reckless, as if my silence gave her permission. "If you keep this up, don't expect Adam to ever forgive you. Don't expect to see your grandchildren. You're crossing a line, Marion. You're tearing this family apart." My hand trembled, not from fear but from something sharper, vindication. Every threat, every cruel twist of language was no longer just aimed at me. It was evidence, captured and preserved. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm. "Brianna, I'm only doing what's legal. The rest is up to you." And I hung up before she could respond. The silence in the room afterward was thick, pressing in against my ribs. I stared at the phone lying flat on the table, The recording saved and time-stamped. Proof. Cold. Indisputable proof that I was not the hysterical old woman she painted me to be, but someone fighting to be heard in the only language that mattered now: documentation. For the first time, I didn't care whether Adam would call, whether he would scold me for daring to stand my ground. I understood then that I no longer needed apologies, or explanations, or even reconciliation. What I needed was evidence, because evidence could not be denied, and it could not be erased. And from this moment forward, evidence would be my shield. The whispers reached me before the people did. In a town like ours, stories moved faster than cars on Main Street. By the time I walked down the block to the corner store, the cashier's eyes slid away from mine, and the woman bagging apples slowed her movements as though afraid to brush shoulders with me. Everyone had heard the mother turned out of her own house, the son too weak to stop it. I had become a cautionary tale. But there were other whispers too, the kind that hung in the air just long enough for me to catch. Neighbors leaning over fences, voices lowered as I walked past. She deserves better. Brianna never liked her. Imagine locking out your own mother. Each word was a balm and a wound at the same time, confirming I wasn't invisible, but also that my shame had been laid bare. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the houses in long shadows, Mr. Keating stopped me at the mailbox. He was a stooped man with wary arms who had lived across the street since Adam was in diapers. His wife hovered at the doorway, arms folded, as though keeping guard. "Marion," he said quietly, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. "We know what's going on. And we know who really paid for that house all these years." I frowned, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope, worn soft at the corners. "You and your husband used to hand us the mortgage checks to drop off when you were out of town. Remember, my Mary's a saver. She made copies, just in case something ever got lost." My breath hitched. "Copies." He nodded and pressed the envelope into my hand. Inside were faded photocopies of checks. 15 years' worth, some signed in my husband's bold scrawl, others in mine when his hand grew too unsteady. Each one carried our names, our signatures, the amounts carefully lined up against the mortgage account. Proof, in black and white, of the years we shouldered the weight of that house while Adam was still finding his footing. I sat on the curb right there, the papers trembling in my hands as dusk gathered. All this time I had believed memory alone was my defense. The long nights, the sacrifices, the meals skipped so bills could be paid. But memory could be dismissed. Paper could not. I looked up and across the street, porch lights blinked on one by one. It felt as if the neighborhood itself had taken a side. For months I had been cast out, scrubbed away by Brianna's confidence and Adam's silence. Now, though, I held a stack of evidence that rewrote the story. The truth was no longer only mine to tell. It had witnesses, signatures, and copies to back it up. And as I tucked the envelope against my chest, I felt the balance shifting. For the first time, the truth wasn't slipping away. It was gathering strength, and it was gathering on my side. The law office was nothing like the gleaming firms you see on television. It sat above a hardware store, its windows streaked with rain, the carpet fraying at the edges. But inside, the air carried the faint smell of ink and dust, the smell of permanence. I clutched the thick folder against my chest, the mortgage papers, the photocopied checks from the Keatings, the eviction notice, even the recording of Brianna's threats saved to a flash drive. My entire life, reduced to exhibits. The attorney was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and kind but tired eyes. He motioned for me to sit, his desk crowded with case files and empty coffee cups. "Tell me everything," he said, and so I did. I unfolded the story piece by piece, my voice trembling at first, then hardening with each injustice recounted. The locks changed, the password stripped away, the room emptied of memories. And finally, the folder. My proof that I wasn't just a guest, but an owner. When I finished, silence filled the room. He adjusted his glasses, rifled through the papers, tapped one finger on the power of attorney document, and nodded slowly. "Mrs. Doyle, you have more than enough here," he said. "This isn't just a case of family disagreement. What they did to you amounts to an illegal eviction." The words sat heavy and strange in my chest. Illegal eviction. Until that moment, everything had felt personal, almost too intimate for courts or statutes to touch. But here, in the language of law, my pain had a name, one that belonged on paper. not just whispered in kitchens and on sidewalks. I opened my mouth, but he lifted another sheet, the mortgage contract. And there's more, he continued. With your husband's power of attorney, and with your name at the top of this agreement, you could petition to restructure the mortgage under your sole control. Essentially, you could take it out of their hands entirely. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. You mean I could own the house? Legally, he said, his eyes holding mine. Yes. It would take paperwork, hearings, but you have the foundation. You could not only fight their eviction attempt, you could cut them out of the mortgage altogether. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My breath came shallow, my throat dry. I had walked into this office clutching scraps of evidence, hoping only to prove that I belonged. Now, I was being told I could do more than belong. I could win. He slid a legal pad toward me. The first step is filing a claim. From there, the process begins. I pressed my pen to the paper, my hand trembling. Not from fear this time, but from something closer to resolve. As I scrawled my name, I realized revenge was not about screaming or slamming doors. It was not even about anger anymore. Revenge in this world was a form to fill, a procedure to follow, a law to invoke. It wasn't emotion, it was process. And I was ready to begin. The envelope left my hands on a Wednesday afternoon, thick with stamped authority, its weight far heavier than the paper it carried. I imagined the path it would take, from the courthouse through the postal system, to the neat little brass mailbox at 42 Willow Lane, my house, our house. I didn't need to be there to see the moment Brianna's manicured fingers tore it open, or the way Adam's face would pale as he read the words summons. Complaint. Illegal eviction. By Friday evening, the phone began to ring. I watched it vibrate on the kitchen counter of the borrowed apartment where I now slept. The caller ID showed Adam's number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up, bracing myself for what his voice might do to me. Mom. The word was hoarse, unsteady, and it nearly broke me just to hear it. For months I had been Marian or worse, invisible, spoken of but not spoken to. Now, suddenly, I was Mom again, behind him. I could hear Brianna, her voice sharp and urgent. Ask her what she's doing. Ask her why she's trying to ruin us. Adam cleared his throat, lowering his voice like he was trying to separate himself from her hysteria. Mom, we got this letter. From the court. Is this really necessary? Couldn't we just talk about it? I closed my eyes. For a moment I wanted to crumble, to believe we could fix this with one family dinner. That he could look at me the way he used to. But then I thought of the note taped to the door. The locks changed, the room stripped bare. I thought of Brianna's voice in the recording, spitting threats about my grandchildren. Some things could not be undone with a single word. The line crackled. Mum? Adam's voice broke again, this time raw. Please. We didn't mean. I cut him off gently, my words steady. Adam. I'll see you in court. Silence spread between us, heavy and final. For once, Brianna had nothing to add. I imagined them standing in the kitchen I had painted yellow with my own hands, holding the letter that might undo everything they thought they controlled. When I hung up, the quiet in the apartment was deafening. I leaned against the counter, my hand still warm from gripping the phone. The ache in my chest was familiar, but beneath it pulsed something stronger, resolve. I realized then that not every conversation was meant to be spoken in kitchens or across phone lines. Some were meant for courtrooms, for the measured cadence of lawyers and judges. Some dialogues belonged to the law itself, and this one, this fight, would be answered there. Not in whispered apologies too late to matter. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, a sterile kind of permanence. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of neighbors, curious strangers, even a few parish women who had whispered about me in the grocery store. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, eyes fixed forward. Across the aisle, Brianna adjusted her blazer with sharp little tugs, her hair smoothed into a curtain of confidence. Adam sat beside her, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the tabletop as if he could disappear into the grain. When the judge entered, the room rose, then settled into silence. My lawyer leaned closer, his voice low. Stay steady. Let her speak first, and speak she did. Brianna's voice filled the chamber with the kind of certainty she wielded like a weapon. Your Honor, she began, her eyes glittering. This house belongs to me and my husband. We have lived there since our wedding day. We've made every payment, borne every responsibility. Mrs. Doyle has no rightful claim. She's interfering out of spite, attempting to undermine her own family. I felt the room stir, an intake of breath, a rustle of skirts. She had a way of making fiction sound like fact, her tone polished, her words rehearsed. For a moment, I almost believed her myself. But then my lawyer stood, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, if I may." He laid a stack of papers on the desk before the judge. "This is the original mortgage agreement. Note the first name listed, Marion Doyle. And this," he lifted another sheet, sliding it forward with a quiet flourish, "is the power of attorney executed by her late husband, granting her full authority in all financial and property matters." The judge peered down, eyes scanning the documents. A hush fell, heavy as a stone dropped into water. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see Brianna's face pale, the color draining until she looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. Her lips parted, but for once no words came. Adam shifted beside her, his hand twitching as though he might reach for hers, then falling back limp against his leg. My lawyer's voice was calm, deliberate. "The defense claims exclusive ownership, but the law, as you can see, does not support that claim. Mrs. Doyle is not an intruder in this house. She is, in fact, its legal co-owner." The gavel tapped lightly, the judge nodding. "We will consider this in deliberation." I sat straighter, my chest rising with a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Around me the murmurs began again, a ripple of recognition spreading through the courtroom. For weeks, my voice had been drowned out by locked doors and sharp accusations. Now, for the first time, the truth was louder. As Brianna's face blanched under the weight of the documents, I understood something vital in this room. Her words were no longer enough. The law spoke louder, and the truth was written in ink that even she could not erase. Brianna rose with the same crisp authority she wore like perfume. Her heels clicked against the tile as she carried a folder to the bench, her voice carrying a practiced calm. "Your Honor, if I may, here is our record of payments. As you can see, every transaction for the last 5 years came from our joint account. Mrs. Doyle has not contributed a cent since my husband and I took over." She turned to glance at me then, a small, triumphant smile tugging at her lips, as if she had just sealed my fate. The papers landed on the judge's desk with a thud that echoed louder than it should have. The gallery leaned forward. For a moment, even I felt my throat constrict, as if she had finally managed to write me out of the story. My lawyer's hand brushed mine gently. "Wet," he whispered, and then he stood, retrieving the worn envelope I had carried like a secret talisman. "Your Honor, while the defense has provided recent records, they neglect to acknowledge the foundation of this house. The years before." He opened the envelope carefully, like unveiling relics, and laid photocopies across the table one by one. The checks were faded, ink softened with time, but the signatures were clear. My husband's looping hand, my own careful cursive, 15 years of stubs and payment slips. Month after month of sacrifices, groceries skipped, clothes patched, overtime shifts endured. Our names written again and again on the lines that kept the roof above us all. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the shuffle of paper as my lawyer slid them closer. "These," he said firmly, "demonstrate not only financial contribution, but ownership, responsibility, and intent. Without the plaintiff's consistent payments, there would be no house for the defendants to claim." I looked across the aisle. Brianna's face had gone rigid, her smile frozen, eyes darting toward Adam for reassurance. But Adam didn't look at her. He didn't look at me either. He bowed his head, staring at the table with a shame that spread across his features like a shadow. His hands were clenched together, knuckles white, as though if he gripped hard enough, he could hold his silence intact. It was that silence that pierced me, more than Brianna's smugness, more than the years of erasure. My own son, flesh of my flesh, could not lift his eyes to meet mine. The boy I had raised, defended, carried through every storm, now shrinking from the truth, because it was easier than standing beside me. The judge cleared his throat, the sound sharp as a gavel strike. "These documents will be entered into evidence. They clearly establish Mrs. Doyle's long-standing financial role in this property." In that moment, I felt the severing thread between mother and son. When blood turns away, when the child you carried cannot meet your eyes, justice must take the place of kinship. If Adam could not speak for me, then the law would. The judge's voice was steady, without drama, but it landed like thunder in the hushed courtroom. After reviewing the evidence presented, he said, his eyes sweeping the room, "This court finds that Mrs. Marion Doy retains legal ownership of 50% of the property located at 42 Willow Lane. As such, she cannot be removed or excluded by the defendants." For a heartbeat. Silence held the air taut. Then I heard it, the sharp inhale from Brianna, as if the verdict had knocked the breath from her lungs. Her shoulders stiffened, her perfectly composed posture unraveling just enough to reveal the crack beneath. Adam sagged beside her, his head dropping into his hands, elbows pressed hard against the table, as if to keep himself from collapsing altogether. I sat very still, fingers knotted together in my lap, trying to absorb what the words meant. Half of the house was mine again, not in memory, not in sentiment, but in the eyes of the law. I thought of all the nights I had lain awake wondering if I would ever cross that threshold again. Now, in a single sentence, the judge had pulled me back inside. Brianna rose, her voice pitched high, brittle against the stillness. "Your Honor, this will destroy us. She hasn't lived there in years. She..." The judge cut her off with a raised hand. "The law is not swayed by convenience, Mrs. Doyle. Ownership is not erased by time, nor by locks." The plaintiff has standing, her mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping on dry land. Adam didn't lift his head. For the first time, I wondered if he finally understood the cost of his silence. My lawyer leaned toward me, his whisper low but edged with triumph. "This is only temporary, but it opens the door. With your power of attorney, you can petition to restructure the mortgage in your own name. That's the next step." The words settled over me like a second verdict. Restructure. Take control. I had come here only hoping to reclaim my dignity, to prove I wasn't an intruder in the house my husband and I built. Now I was being handed something even sharper, the chance to shift the balance entirely, to hold the mortgage not as a co-signer, but as the primary. Across the room, Brianna finally sat down, her face drained of color. She gripped Adam's arm, whispering furiously, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. His silence was no longer complicity, it was surrender. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself against the flood of emotions. Grief, relief, something dangerously close to triumph. I had learned the hard way that power does not come from the keys you hold or the doors you lock. Keys can be replaced, locks can be changed overnight. But a signature on paper, a name carved into a deed, that endures. As I left the courtroom, the ruling echoing in my ears, I realized the truth: my power had never disappeared. It had only been waiting in the fine print, buried in the files my husband had left behind. And now, it was mine to wield. The bank manager's office was a glass cube set at the far end of the lobby, its walls transparent, so that the world could watch what happened inside. I clutched my folder close as the receptionist led me in, the heels of my shoes clicking against the polished floor, like a metronome counting down to something irreversible. The man who rose to greet me was in his 50s, silver at his temples, his tie loosened just enough to suggest he had seen a long day of numbers and signatures. Still, his handshake was firm, his eyes direct. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "How can I help you today?" I sat, the weight of the folder heavy on my lap. For a moment I could hear Brianna's voice in my head, dismissive and sharp. "You're not part of this anymore." But then I opened the folder, sliding out the mortgage agreement and the power of attorney, laying them across his desk as if I were setting down cards in a game I had finally learned how to play. "I want the mortgage placed in my name alone," I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. My husband gave me full power of attorney before he died. My name is first on the contract. And after recent court proceedings, it's clear I retain legal ownership of the property. The manager didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, reading each page slowly, methodically, his pen tapping softly against the desk. I watched his face, searching for the hint of dismissal I had braced myself for. But when he finally looked up, his expression was neither skeptical nor pitying. It was professional, certain. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "these documents are in order. You have every legal right to restructure the loan in your name. It will require some updates to our records, but that is administrative. The foundation is already here." My chest tightened. "So it can be done," he nodded. "It will be done. We'll begin the paperwork immediately." For a moment I couldn't speak. The room blurred at the edges, not with tears but with the sheer force of realization. For months, I had been locked out, shut away from my own life. Now, with one acknowledgement, the locks shifted. Not the brass and steel ones on the doors, but the invisible locks that held my future hostage. As I signed where he indicated, each stroke of the pen felt like the turn of a key. Click, one lock undone. Click, another barrier opened. By the time the last signature dried, I no longer felt like a woman begging for scraps of dignity. I felt like someone reclaiming what had always been hers. When I stood, the manager extended his hand again. Congratulations, Mrs. Doyle. The mortgage will reflect your name as the primary holder. Walking out of that office, the late afternoon sun sharp against the glass, I realized I had changed a lock far more powerful than the one Brianna had replaced. Not on the front door, but on the finances that defined the house itself. And this time, the key was mine alone. The key was small, brass, and unremarkable. Yet when the bank manager placed it in my palm, it felt heavier than anything I had held in years. Its teeth glinted under the fluorescent light, a symbol that no locksmith, no angry daughter-in-law, no betrayal could strip away. This wasn't just metal. This was authority. This was mine. I walked up the familiar driveway that evening, the gravel crunching under my shoes just as it always had, but everything felt altered. The shutters were the same faded green, the front porch sagged in the same corner, but the house no longer looked like it belonged to them. It belonged to me again. Or maybe, finally, it never stopped. I slid the key into the lock. Smooth, it turned without resistance, as if the door itself remembered me, as if it sighed with relief to feel my hand on it again. The next morning, Brianna appeared. Her hair was less polished than usual, her eyes shadowed. For the first time, she didn't look like a victor. She looked like someone who had realized the battle had slipped out of her control. "Marian," she said, her voice low, almost pleading, "we've made mistakes. I know we've handled things poorly. But this is our home. The children's home. Don't take it from us. Please show us mercy. We'll make it right." Behind her, Adam stood silent again, his hands jammed deep into his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. I searched his face for some flicker of the boy who once ran barefoot through this yard, shouting for me to watch as he caught fireflies. But there was nothing. Just absence. I tightened my grip on the key, the metal biting into my skin. For years, I had bent myself into forgiveness, into patience, into the hope that kindness would soften them. But this house had been stripped of my photographs, my altar, my memories. They had made it clear that to them, I was disposable. Now, standing at this threshold, I realized I could not pretend those wounds had not been inflicted. I placed the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, the house breathing in again, welcoming me. I stepped across the threshold, and for a brief moment, Brianna's face lit with hope. She moved forward, as if to follow me inside. But I stopped her with a raised hand. My voice was quiet, but it carried all the weight of the past months. "This door is mine now, and not everyone is welcome." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Adam, but he had no words to give her. Slowly, she backed away, her heels clicking against the porch, retreating into the silence she had once forced upon me. As I stood inside, alone but steady, I understood a house can be large enough for a family, but the heart inside it must choose who belongs. And mine, scarred and wary, had locked itself tighter than any door. The house was open, but my heart was not. The kitchen was quiet the way it used to be on winter nights, when my husband would come in from shoveling snow and hang his coat over the back of the chair. The wallpaper had peeled a little more since then, the linoleum dulled with years, but the table still bore the same scratches from when Adam's toy cars had raced across it. I lit a candle and set it beside my husband's framed photograph, the one of him smiling faintly, a fishing cap tilted sideways. The flickering light brought his eyes alive again, and for a moment I felt less alone. I cupped my hands around the flame, whispering into the silence. "We did it. I kept my promise. The house is still ours." My voice caught, and I leaned closer, as if he could hear me through the veil of time. "They tried to lock me out, but I kept the door open. I kept us here." Saying the words released something tight in my chest. For weeks I had been clenched, every breath sharpened by anger and fear. Now, in this kitchen, I allowed myself a long, steady exhale. The house smelled faintly of wax and old coffee grounds, familiar and grounding. I pressed my palm against the table. half expecting his hand to meet mine across the surface like it had so many nights when we talked about bills and birthdays and small town gossip. Instead, there was only the warmth of the wood and the memory of his steady faith in me. Then the phone rang. The sound was jarring in the stillness, its trill echoing through the empty rooms. For a moment I didn't move, afraid it might be Adam, afraid it might be Brianna with more words sharpened like knives. But when I finally picked it up, the voice on the other end was calm, professional. "This is Doyle. This is the bank. We're calling to confirm that the mortgage has been officially updated. You are now listed as the sole account holder." The words rolled over me like a tide I hadn't dared believe would rise. Sole account holder. Mine and mine alone. The house was no longer contested ground, no longer a battlefield. It was secure, tethered legally and irrevocably to my name. I thanked them, my voice steady, and set the phone down. The candle flickered, casting shadows along the cabinets. I turned back to my husband's photograph. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. "It's done. I've paid the last debt, not to the bank, but to us. To what we built." The quiet pressed in, but it was no longer suffocating. It was a blanket soft and sure. I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath me, and felt the house settle around me as if it, too, had been waiting for this moment. They had thought new locks could erase me, that eviction could sever me from the bones of this place. But locks are only steel. They break, they change. What endures is the deed, the signature, the stubborn will to remain. They changed the locks, yes, but I changed the fate of this house. I sometimes wonder how easily life tilts, how quickly a mother can become a stranger in the very house she built. They thought locks would keep me out, that silence and shame would bend me into surrender. But I learned that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's hidden in old receipts, in a signature buried deep in a file, in the quiet faith of a husband who insisted on saving every scrap of paper. Justice didn't come in the form of apologies, or even reconciliation. It came with ink on a page, with the steady voice of a judge, with the cold certainty of a bank's approval. It wasn't love that saved me in the end. It was persistence, patience, and the knowledge that I was worth fighting for. This house is mine not because I locked others out, but because I refused to be erased. And though my heart will always ache for the boy who once ran barefoot through its halls, I have accepted that sometimes family fails you. When it does, you learn to stand tall on the foundation you built with your own hands. They changed the locks, but I changed the story. Thank you for staying with me through this story. In the end, it wasn't just about a house. It was about justice, about reclaiming dignity when the people you love betray you. What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Telling Story with me for more powerful stories that will stay with you long after they end.